Welcome to Japanese Sleep Whispers, your sanctuary for peaceful nights and gentle dreams. Here, you will find calming bedtime stories inspired by the timeless beauty and traditions of Japan. Each story is read slowly in a soothing voice, accompanied by natural sounds such as flowing rivers and the tranquil rhythm of shishi-odoshi. Whether you seek relaxation, relief from stress, or help falling asleep, these tales invite you to drift away into a world of serenity. Imagine quiet temples, moonlit gardens, and the whispering bamboo forests as you listen. If you'd like these soothing stories to be part of your nightly routine, consider subscribing so they're always with you when you need them. Subscribe and let these stories be your nightly ritual of calm and rest. Thank you for being here. May you always find peace in every moment. Seaside village, embraced by the tide. Prologue: the whisper of the sea. The night was nearly gone, yet the sun had not risen. Beyond the horizon, a faint silver light rested upon the sea, as if the world were still half asleep. The tide came and went in slow, even breaths, whispering to the sand with the gentleness of an old lullaby. In that quiet hour before dawn, the seaside village of Hamura was wrapped in the hush of dreams. Thatched roofs glimmered with dew, and narrow paths wound between wooden houses like forgotten lines of poetry. From the small harbor, the scent of salt and fish lingered in the air, mixed with the sweetness of pine smoke drifting from distant hearths. Somewhere among those houses, a single lantern burned low, its light trembling softly against the paper walls. Inside, a young man stirred. His name was Ren. He was a fisherman not yet 20 summers old, his hair dark like the night sea, his eyes deep and calm as the water he knew so well. He had lived all his life in Hamura, as his father and his father's father had before him. The sea was not only his livelihood, it was his companion, his teacher, and sometimes, his silence. Ren sat upon the wooden floor, tying the last of his nets. The faint creak of hemp between his fingers was the only sound in the small house. When he paused, he could hear the sea's sigh beyond the walls, a slow rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of his own heart. Outside, the world was pale and waiting. Mist clung to the shore like thin silk, and the waves rose and fell in steady grace. Ren stepped outside, his bare feet meeting the cold earth. The air was sharp, carrying the fragrance of tide and rain and distant cedar. He closed his eyes and listened. There was a time, he remembered, when his mother had sung to him a song about the sea that never slept. Her voice was soft as the wind over the water, filled with warmth and sorrow. She had passed away many years ago, but on mornings like this, he could almost hear her again, within the hush of the waves. The sea remembers, even when we forget. Its voice is the memory of all who ever loved it. The words lingered in his mind like a drifting shell. Ren lifted his fishing basket, slung his oar over his shoulder, and walked toward the shore. The sand beneath his feet was cool and firm. He could see the faint outline of his small boat rocking gently at the edge of the tide. It was called Aobun, the Blue Boat. His father had named it long ago, and Ren had kept the name, believing it carried the memory of the old man's hands. He pushed the boat into the water. The sound of wood meeting wave was low and steady, like the first breath of morning. As the boat drifted free, Ren looked toward the horizon. The sky was still half dark, the colors between night and dawn merging in deep blues and soft gray. Clouds floated like torn silk, and beneath them, the ocean shimmered faintly, an endless mirror for the waking world. He began to row. Each stroke of the oar was smooth and deliberate, breaking the silence only to deepen it again. The mist parted before him, revealing stretches of quiet sea. No birds cried, no voices called, only the pulse of the tide and the soft splash of water against wood. For a moment, Ren felt as if he were drifting not upon the sea, but within it, part of its breath, its dream, its timeless flow. In the far distance, he could see the faint outline of Moon Cliff, a white ridge rising from the water. It was said that spirits once gathered there, to listen to the songs of those lost at sea. Old women of the village still left small offerings, shells, rice, or paper lanterns upon the sand during the summer festival, whispering prayers for safe return. Ren had always watched them from afar, never certain whether to believe. He respected the sea, feared it even, but he did not think of it as alive, not until lately. Lately, there had been nights when he awoke to the sound of a voice, faint and flowing, like someone calling his name from beneath the waves. He never told anyone. He simply listened and wondered. The first light of dawn crept across the sea, brushing the world with gold. The mist began to lift, revealing the line of the village behind him, the roofs glowing gently, the fields still heavy with dew. He could hear the first rooster's cry echo across the hills. Ren rested his oar, letting the current carry him. He reached into the water and let it slip through his fingers, cool and alive. Tiny ripples formed and vanished, like fleeting thoughts. He breathed deeply, the salt air filling his chest, and felt an odd stillness settle within him, not emptiness, but peace. He did not know that this morning would be the beginning of something quietly extraordinary. The sea, which had watched over him all his life, was waiting to reveal one of its oldest secrets. And somewhere, far beneath the surface, a light began to stir faint as a lantern's glow, swaying gently with the tide. The wind shifted, carrying with it the whisper of the deep. Ren lifted his head. For an instant, he thought he heard his name again, not in the voice of any living soul, but in the hush of the sea itself. It was soft, almost tender, as if the ocean were calling him home. He blinked, listening, but the sound faded, replaced once more by the steady rhythm of the waves. The boat drifted on, rocking gently. The horizon opened before him like a slow dream. And behind him, the village still slept, embraced by the tide. Chapter 1: The Morning Tide. The first true light of morning touched the sea like a whisper, soft and trembling. From the eastern horizon, a golden thread began to unspool, stretching slowly across the waves. The air carried the scent of salt and wakame, and from the hills, the faint call of cranes echoed through the mist. The village of Hamora stirred. Thin curls of smoke rose from kitchen fires. Somewhere, a wooden door slid open with a gentle creak, followed by the muffled laughter of children. The day had begun. Ren guided his small boat back toward the shore, the oars gliding through the water with a calm rhythm. The catch was modest: a basket of sardines, a few mackerel, glimmering like silver coins in the early sun. He was not a man of great ambition. A day's work, a bowl of rice, and the quiet company of the sea were enough. Still, there was something about this morning, a stillness that felt new, as if the tide itself were holding its breath. When his boat touched sand, he stepped down and pulled it ashore. The waves brushed against his ankles, cool and playful. Farther up the beach, the villagers were already gathering, women spreading nets to dry, men mending sails, a few children chasing the tide as it retreated. Back early, Ren. The voice came from an older fisherman named Kengo, his back bent from years at sea. He smiled, his teeth missing but his eyes bright. Ren nodded, smiling faintly. The sea was quiet today. Almost too quiet. Kengo chuckled, tossing a line over his shoulder. A quiet sea means she's dreaming. You should let her sleep while you can. Ren only smiled again, but the words lingered. Dreaming sea. There was truth in that. He had felt it too. By mid-morning, the village had fully awakened. The cries of gulls mixed with the laughter of merchants calling from the market street. The rhythmic clatter of wooden geta echoed along the shore road. Women in indigo-dyed kimono washed clothes in shallow basins, their voices floating like soft music. Ren carried his basket toward the small stall run by Ume, the fishmonger's wife. She was a woman of endless chatter, her sleeves always rolled high, her hair tied in a loose bun. "Ah, Ren. You've brought the morning shine again," she said, eyes glinting as she examined his catch. She weighed the fish carefully, her hands moving with quick, practiced grace. "You look tired, boy," she added, glancing up. "Dreams keeping you awake?" Ren hesitated. "Perhaps, though I'm not sure they were dreams." Ume laughed. "Then perhaps you've been listening to the sea again. Don't let her lure you too close, she's a jealous mistress." Her words were light, teasing, but they carried the tone of the old village tales stories of the Umi. No Ko, the children of the sea, who called to fishermen and pulled them beneath the waves. Ren smiled politely, paid his share, and moved on. By the time he returned home, the sun had climbed high. His small house stood near the edge of the pine grove, overlooking the water. It was quiet, always quiet. The floorboards creaked faintly as he entered, the air still cool from the night. He placed his tools in their places, washed his hands in a wooden basin, and sat by the open shoji. From there, he could see the sea spread endlessly before him, its surface shimmering like silk. The rhythm of the tide was steady, comforting, yet beneath that calm he felt something alive. A pulse, faint but real. He poured a cup of tea and let the steam rise slowly, curling like breath. It was a simple life, one he had chosen after his father's death, when many young men had gone to Edo or Nagasaki seeking new fortunes. Ren had stayed. He could not say why. Perhaps it was the voice of the sea, a voice that spoke not in words, but in silence. That afternoon, clouds drifted in from the east. The sunlight softened, turning the sea from blue to pale jade. Ren repaired the edge of a net while sitting beneath the eaves. The air was heavy with the smell of rain, yet no wind stirred. Then he saw it, something small and faint, glinting near the shoreline. At first, he thought it was a shell. But as the waves receded, the object remained a lantern. It was made of bamboo and paper, water-stained but still intact. A fishing lantern, perhaps, though none like he had seen. Inside, there was no candle, yet it seemed to hold a faint light of its own, a soft, bluish glow, like moonlight caught in glass. Ren frowned slightly, his curiosity stirring. He reached down, lifting it carefully from the water. It was cool to the touch, and as he turned it in his hands, a small whisper brushed his ear, so soft he almost thought it the wind. "Do not forget me." He froze. The words were distant, echoing, as if spoken from beneath the tide. He looked around. No one was there. Only the rolling surf and the cries of distant gulls. The lantern's glow flickered, then faded, leaving only the wet paper in his palm. That night, he placed it by the window. Outside, the moon rose full and golden, spreading a path of light across the waves. Ren lay upon his futon, listening to the sea through the open shoji. Each sound came slower, softer, the sigh of the tide, the creak of distant boats, the rustle of wind among the reeds. His eyes grew heavy, yet before sleep took him, he thought he saw something, a faint shimmer near the lantern, like mist shaped into a woman's form. It lingered for only a breath, then was gone. And from somewhere deep within the night, a voice whispered again, low and tender. Ren. Chapter 2. A lantern by the shore. The rain came softly that night, like a memory returning from far away. It did not rush or roar, but fell in fine silver threads that blurred the world into shades of quiet gray. From the eaves of Ren's small house, droplets gathered, lost, and joined the earth with a rhythm older than any song. Ren sat by the open shoji, watching the water trace delicate paths down the bamboo. The sea beyond was half hidden, a pale outline shifting through the mist. In the corner of the room, the old lantern he had found still rested upon a wooden stand, its paper wrinkled, its frame slightly cracked. And yet, even without a flame, it glowed faintly, as though breathing with the tide itself. Ren leaned forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the lantern. It was cold, almost like touching the surface of still water. When he moved it, it made no sound, no rattle of bamboo, no sigh of paper. He thought of throwing it away. Strange things from the sea were not always welcome, the elders said. Such objects carried the whispers of drowned spirits, seeking warmth among the living. But something in the lantern's fragile light calmed him. It was not haunting, it was lonely. And so, he left it there. The days passed. The rain continued for 3 nights and 3 days, and the village became a blur of gray roofs and mist. People moved more slowly, fires burned lower, and voices carried softly through the damp air. Ren mended nets, cleaned his tools, and waited for the tide to rest. Each evening, he lit no lamp, allowing the faint blue glow of the lantern to fill the room. It pulsed gently, in time with the sound of the sea. He found that when he closed his eyes, he could almost feel it, a heartbeat that was not his own. On the 4th morning, the sky cleared. A calm light spread over the village, touching each puddle and leaf with warmth. Ren stepped outside, stretching his arms, the scent of wet pine and earth rising around him. The world seemed freshly born. He walked down to the beach, barefoot, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. The sand was cool, smooth from the receding tide. Tiny shells glimmered like stars scattered across the shore. He looked toward the horizon and felt a soft unease, not fear, but expectation. The sea was calm again, too quiet. It shimmered strangely, as if light and water had become one. A few fishermen were already at work farther down the coast. Ren waved to them, then turned his gaze toward the rocks near Moon Cliff. Something glimmered there, faint, fleeting, like a light behind a veil. For a moment, he thought it might be another lantern, half buried in seaweed. He walked closer. But when he reached the place, there was nothing, only the sound of waves folding upon themselves. He crouched, tracing the sand with his hand. The pattern left by the tide was intricate, almost deliberate spiral lines that wound inward, like a symbol or a signature. When the next wave came, it erased them. Ren exhaled slowly. "The sea writes and the sea forgets," he murmured. That night, as he prepared for sleep, he noticed something new. The lantern's glow had changed. It was no longer a steady blue but flickered softly, shifting between silver and pale green. The air in the room grew cooler, touched by the faint scent of lilies, impossible in this season. Then, from within the light, a sound faint as the breath of the tide. A voice. Dot. Ren. He froze. His pulse quickened, but the voice did not frighten him. It was the same gentle tone he had heard once before, the night he found the lantern. He rose slowly, kneeling beside it. The glow wavered like the reflection of the moon on water. He whispered, "Who are you?" No answer came. Only the rustle of the sea beyond the shoji, and the rhythmic sigh of waves upon sand. Yet the lantern's light pulsed once bright, then dim as though in reply. The following day, he brought the lantern to the shore. The sky was clear, the water glass smooth. He placed the lantern upon a flat rock and waited, feeling foolish yet curious. Seagulls circled above, their cries sharp and fleeting. Minutes passed, then hours. The tide began to rise, climbing closer to the lantern's edge. Ren watched as the foam curled around it, reflecting the sun in a shimmer of white. Then, as the waves touched the base, something remarkable happened. The water glowed, just faintly, a ripple of light spreading outward, circling the rock like a living ring. Ren stared, unable to move. The glow deepened, soft and silver, and within it he thought he saw a shadow, the outline of a hand, pale and slender, reaching upward from beneath the surface. He stepped back, heart pounding. But the moment he blinked, the light vanished. Only the sea remained, innocent and calm. That night, he dreamed. He was standing beneath the water, yet he could breathe. Around him, endless ribbons of light drifted like slow-moving stars. The sound of the tide was everywhere above, below, within. And through that current, a figure approached a girl, her hair flowing like strands of seaweed, her eyes luminous and clear. She said nothing, but lifted a small lantern in her hands, the very same one he had found. Inside it, the light shimmered softly, beating like a heart. Then she smiled a smile so tender it broke something open in him, and the sea around them dissolved into silence. Ren awoke just before dawn, the faint scent of lilies still lingering in the air. The lantern beside him was glowing again. Chapter 3: The Voice Beneath the Waves. The dawn after the dream arrived wrapped in mist. It drifted in from the sea like a soft breath, veiling the village in silver. The outlines of boats and houses seemed to float in the air, half real, half remembered. Ren stood on the beach, the damp sand cool beneath his feet, and for a long while he simply listened. The tide was slow, deliberate, breathing against the shore in deep, even sighs. He could not tell where the world ended and the sea began. It was as if the horizon had folded into itself, and everything sky, wave, and thought had become one slow, dreaming motion. In his hand, the lantern. Its light was dim now, a pale glow like moonlight caught inside a shell. He held it close, feeling the faint hum that lived within it. He whispered, "Who are you?" and the sea replied with silence. The villagers rarely came to the shore in such weather. Fog, they said, was when spirits wandered, when the boundary between this world and the next grew thin. Only the foolish, or the lonely, walked the beach when the mist moved like breath. Ren did not think himself foolish. But perhaps he was lonely. He had lived alone since his father's passing, and the sea, though it gave him everything, never answered. Yet lately, it had begun to feel alive again, as it had in the songs his mother once sang. He wondered if this was what she had meant when she said the sea remembered. He walked along the water's edge, the lantern swinging lightly at his side. The fog muffled every sound: his footsteps, the waves, the distant caw of a gull. Time itself seemed to drift, suspended between breaths. Then, through the whiteness, he heard it faint, melodic, like a voice carried upon the tide. Not human, yet not entirely other. It rose and fell with the rhythm of the waves, words hidden beneath the hum. He froze, straining to listen. Come back. To where the sea first dreamed. The sound was so soft he could not be sure if it was truly there or only within him. Still, his heart quickened. He took a step forward, then another, drawn toward the sound as if the sea itself were calling. The mist thickened. Shapes moved within it, not solid, but fluid, like fragments of memory. Ren could barely see a few steps ahead. Then, the ground beneath his feet shifted, the sand gave way to smooth stone. He realized he was standing near Moon Cliff, though he had not noticed how far he had walked. The cliff rose from the water, pale and wet, its surface glimmering faintly in the fog. The tide lapped at its base, whispering. The voice came again, clearer now. Ren. He turned sharply. The lantern in his hand flared, its light swelling to a soft, silvery bloom. And from within the mist, a shadow began to take form. At first, it was only the shape of a wave, rising higher than the rest. Then, the water itself seemed to gather, curl inward, and unfold into something more. A figure stood upon the edge of the surf, slender, barefoot, her hair dark as the deep. She wore no robe, only a thin garment of mist and light, as though the sea had clothed her in its reflection. Her eyes, they were luminous, clear as the morning tide. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of the whole ocean. "You found it," she said. "The lantern that remembers." Ren stared, his breath caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. He wanted to speak, but the words would not come. She smiled faintly, tilting her head. "Do not be afraid. You have heard my song, haven't you?" Ren swallowed. "Who are you?" Her gaze dropped to the lantern. "The sea forgot my name long ago," she whispered. "But once they called me Tsubaki." The name hung in the mist like a note from an unseen instrument. Tsubaki. Ren had heard it before, a flower that bloomed even in the cold of winter, bright and fragile. He looked at her again, trying to make sense of her presence. "Are you real?" he asked quietly. She laughed, a sound so light it could have been part of the wind. "Real?" she echoed. "Perhaps. Perhaps not. The sea remembers, but not always clearly." Ren felt a chill pass through him. He should have been frightened, but he wasn't. Her presence felt neither ghostly nor human, only familiar, like a forgotten melody his soul still knew. The waves brushed at her feet, yet she did not sink. Each ripple seemed to hold her up, shimmering faintly as if the water itself obeyed her. She stepped closer, and the air grew cool, filled with the scent of salt and something faintly sweet, lilies, again. "Why did you call me?" he asked. "I didn't," she said softly. "You heard because you were listening." Most hearts forget how. Ren lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. The tide murmured between them. Tsubaki looked toward the horizon, her expression distant. "There was a time when the sea was full of voices," she said. "Each wave carried a dream. But humans stopped listening, and the dreams drifted away." Her hand brushed the lantern. "This light is a memory of those dreams, of what was once promised between sea and shore." Ren studied her, the way her outline shimmered faintly in the light. He realized she was fading, her form dissolving like mist. He stepped forward instinctively. "Wait," but she only smiled. "Don't chase the tide, Ren. It always returns in time." The next wave rolled in, gentle yet deep. It passed through her like smoke, and when it receded, she was gone. Only the lantern remained, its light dim once more. Ren fell to his knees, the surf washing over his hands. The sea whispered in his ears not words, but something older, quieter. He looked down at the lantern, still warm from her touch, and whispered her name. Tsubaki. That night, he dreamt again. He was walking along the ocean floor, beneath drifting threads of moonlight. Around him, the sea hummed not with menace, but with longing. Tsubaki stood in the distance, holding the lantern. Her hair floated like a veil, her eyes luminous. "The sea remembers," she said again, her voice soft as the tide. "But remembering is also longing." She reached out her hand, and the moment their fingers touched, the sea around them filled with light. Ren awoke just before dawn, breathless. The lantern glowed softly beside him, casting its gentle light against the paper walls. Outside, the waves murmured as if repeating her name. Chapter 4: The Girl of the Tidal Mist. The morning after the dream was pale and trembling. Mist still hung low over the sea, yet through it the sun began to rise, a soft, round glow like a lantern behind silk. Its light touched the roofs of Hamora, turned the wet sand to gold, and warmed the cold breath of dawn. Ren stood outside his small house, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea. He had not slept much. The dream had been too vivid, too gentle to forget. Even now, he could feel her presence, Tsubaki, somewhere beyond the waves, watching. He turned toward the shore. The sea lay calm, its surface smooth as glass, and yet a faint line of mist still lingered where the water met the sky. It moved like a living thing, breathing in rhythm with the tide. Ren set down his cup and began to walk. The path to the beach wound through a grove of pines, their needles glistening with dew. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the faint hum of distant waves. He walked slowly, as if afraid to wake the morning too soon. When he reached the sand, he stopped. Something had changed. There, near the rocks where the tide curved inward, he saw a figure sitting at the edge of the water. She was wrapped in a light gray kimono, her hair dark and loose, glistening with mist. For a moment, Ren thought his dream had not yet ended. He stepped closer, hesitant, the sand whispering beneath his feet. The girl turned her head. Her eyes were clear as shallow water, soft but deep eyes that seemed to hold the reflection of the entire sea. For a time, neither spoke. The waves came and went, brushing the stones with a slow sigh. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. She did not move. Finally, Ren found his voice. "You're Tsubaki?" The girl tilted her head, as if searching for the meaning of the name. After a pause, she nodded slowly. "I think so," she said. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "It feels familiar." She looked down at her hands. "I woke up here, by the tide. I don't know how long I've been asleep." Ren knelt a short distance away. Her kimono was dry despite the damp air, her skin pale as sea foam. There was something both fragile and unearthly about her, yet she seemed real, undeniably so. "Do you remember anything?" Ren asked softly. Tsubaki shook her head. "Only water," she murmured. "And light. And a song that I can't quite recall." Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. "The sea keeps singing it, but I can't hear the words anymore." Ren felt a shiver that was not from the cold. He looked out at the water, then back at her. "You should come with me," he said gently. "The village isn't far. You'll catch a chill if you stay here." She hesitated, her eyes flickering like the tide between curiosity and uncertainty. Then she nodded. They walked together along the narrow beach path. The mist was lifting, and the first true warmth of the day began to reach them. Ren kept his distance at first, unsure how to speak to her. Tsubaki, too, seemed content with silence, her gaze moving over every shell and ripple of sand as though seeing the world for the first time. When they reached his small house, she paused at the doorway. Ren slid open the shoji, the faint scent of tea still lingering inside. "You can rest here," he said. She stepped in carefully, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. Her eyes drifted toward the old lantern resting near the window, the same one that had led him to her. She walked to it and knelt, fingers brushing the paper frame. "This light," she whispered. "It feels like home." Ren poured her a cup of tea. She held it with both hands, gazing at the rising steam as though it were something sacred. When she drank, her expression softened. "This warmth," she murmured. "It's strange but kind." He smiled faintly. "It's only tea." She looked at him, her lips curved in the smallest of smiles. "Then kindness tastes like tea." Ren laughed softly, and for a moment, the silence between them became something gentle, like the pause between waves. Days passed. Tsubaki stayed with Ren, though she spoke little. She helped him mend nets, sweep the floor, and gather driftwood. At night, she would sit by the shore, watching the moon reflect upon the tide. The villagers noticed her soon enough. Ume, the fishmonger's wife, was the first to ask, "Ren, where did you find that girl? She's quiet as a shadow." Ren only said, "By the sea." Ume frowned, half jesting, half serious. "You'd best be careful. The sea gives, but it also takes." He nodded, though his heart already knew that truth. One evening, Tsubaki began to hum. It was a slow, wordless tune, soft as the sound of waves upon the sand. Ren stopped his work to listen. The melody stirred something deep within him, a memory, faint but aching. He realized it was the same lullaby his mother had sung when he was a child. "The sea remembers, even when we forget." He turned to her, his voice low. "That song, how do you know it?" Tsubaki looked startled, as if the question had awakened something inside her. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just comes when I listen to the sea." That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Ren asked, "Do you think the sea has a heart?" Tsubaki looked toward the horizon, where the tide shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "Yes," she said after a pause. "But it beats slowly, so slowly that we can only hear it in dreams." Ren watched her profile in the dim light, her face serene, her hair stirring in the wind. He realized he did not feel the loneliness he once carried. The silence now felt full like the sea after a storm, alive with quiet motion. Later, when she fell asleep by the window, the lantern began to glow softly once more. Ren watched it, listening to the rhythmic breath of the tide beyond the walls. The light reflected faintly on Tsubaki's face, making her look almost translucent, like the mist itself had chosen to take human form. He did not know whether she had come from the depths or from his own dreams. But as he lay beside the window, the sea whispering through the night, he knew that whatever she was, she had brought peace. And for the first time in many years, Ren drifted into sleep without the ache of solitude. Outside, the tide rose gently, embracing the shore as though cradling both of their dreams. Chapter 5: The Song of Forgotten Shores. The days in Hamura passed like the slow rhythm of waves. Morning light poured through the shoji in soft gold. The afternoons carried the fragrance of pine and salt, and the evenings came wrapped in the hush of tide and wind. Ren and Tsubaki lived in a silence that was not empty but full of small sounds, of quiet gestures, of unspoken comfort. It was as if the sea itself breathed through their days, a living presence that neither could name, but both could feel. Tsubaki had learned to smile more. Sometimes, when Ren returned from the shore, she would be sitting by the window, with the lantern beside her, humming a song so soft that even the waves seemed to pause to listen. One evening, as the first fireflies flickered among the reeds, Ren sat outside, mending his fishing lines. Tsubaki's voice drifted through the open door, a melody without words, flowing and circular, like the sea's own lullaby. He closed his eyes and listened. Each note was gentle, familiar, and yet beneath it ran something older, deeper, a sadness too vast for any one life. When she finished, he asked quietly, "That song, you've sung it before. Where did you learn it?" Tsubaki paused, her hands resting on her lap. "I don't know," she said softly. "It just lives inside me." She turned her gaze toward the sea. "When I hum it, I feel as though I'm remembering something that isn't mine, like the voice of the tide that never forgot." The next day, an old monk visited the village. He was from the temple that stood upon the cliff road, a small place that smelled of incense and pine sap. The villagers called him Soen, a quiet man who spoke little but saw much. He came to bless the boats before the coming full moon, for the tides in that season were said to be the strongest and the most unpredictable. When Soen saw Tsubaki by Ren's side, he stopped. For a long moment, he studied her face, his eyes narrow and thoughtful. "You've taken in a stranger, Ren," he said gently. "A rare kindness." Ren bowed. "She has no home that she remembers." Soen nodded slowly. "And yet, she carries the scent of the sea more deeply than any fisherman." That evening, Soen shared tea with them. The old monk's robes were faded, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like wind through cedar leaves. "There is an old tale told in these parts," he began, "about the kami of the tide. They say she was once a maiden who loved a fisherman. But he sailed too far one night, chasing the light of a lantern that floated out to sea. When his boat never returned, the maiden walked into the waves and vanished." He sipped his tea. "The villagers say the tide became her breath, and her voice became the song the sea still sings to those who listen." Ren's hand tightened around his cup. He glanced at Tsubaki, who sat very still, her eyes lowered. Soen looked at her kindly. "Forgive an old man his stories. The sea is full of them." After the monk left, silence lingered. Outside, the tide was high, and the moon shone wide upon the water. Tsubaki stood by the window, the lantern's faint light tracing her silhouette. Ren came to her side. "Do you believe what he said?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "The story feels familiar," she whispered. "When he spoke of the lantern, I could almost see it drifting in the dark, calling to someone." Her fingers brushed the wooden frame. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm part of that song, if I came from what the sea chose not to forget." Ren looked at her, the reflection of the moonlight in her eyes. "If that's true," he said gently, "then the sea gave you back to the world for a reason." Tsubaki smiled faintly. "And what reason is that?" Ren's answer came like a breath. "To be heard." From that night, the sea changed its voice. Its rhythm grew slower, its waves softer. Sometimes, Ren thought he could hear words woven into the tide. Not in any language he knew, but in a tone that stirred the heart more than understanding could. Tsubaki's song changed, too. It grew fuller, deeper, as though the sea were singing through her. The villagers began to notice. Children would stop near Ren's home to listen, their faces dreamy, their eyes wide with wonder. Ume once said, "When that girl sings, even the wind holds its breath." Ren only smiled. He had begun to feel that same stillness within himself, a calm that reached deeper than sleep. One night, near the end of the lunar month, Ren awoke to the sound of Tsubaki's song. It was late, the moon stood high and bright, and the sea outside shone like molten silver. He rose and found her standing at the shore, the lantern glowing in her hands. Her kimono stirred in the breeze, her hair moving like slow water. "Tsubaki," he called softly. She turned, her eyes distant, almost sorrowful. "The sea is remembering," she said. "It's calling again." Ren stepped toward her. "Then let it call. You're here now." But she shook her head gently. Sometimes remembering is also longing. When the tide comes too close, something must return to keep the balance. The waves rolled higher, glowing faintly. Ren reached out, grasping her hand. Her skin was cool, and beneath it he could feel a pulse that beat in time with the sea. "Don't go," he whispered. Tsubaki looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. "I won't, not yet." She raised the lantern, its light brightening like a captured moon. The sea's murmur softened, and for a breath, everything, wind, wave, heart, became still. Then she began to sing again, and her voice rose like mist under moonlight, a song for those who had forgotten the sound of peace. Ren listened, his heart steady, knowing he was hearing something older than love, older than loss, the song of the forgotten shores. When her voice faded, the night seemed to exhale. The tide receded, leaving behind only the sound of calm water. Tsubaki lowered the lantern and turned to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For listening." Ren nodded. "Always." They stood there together, the moon above them, the sea breathing below, and the world between them as gentle as sleep. Chapter 6: The Moonlit Current. The full moon rose like a silent promise. Its reflection lay across the sea, a ribbon of light that trembled and shimmered with each breath of wind. The waves moved gently, as if the world itself were afraid to disturb the night. Ren stood at the edge of the water, his feet half buried in cool sand. Behind him, the village slept. The faint glow of lamps shimmered through paper doors, and the scent of cedar smoke drifted down from the hillside. But the sea was awake. It murmured, its rhythm strange and unending. He could feel it, the slow pull beneath the surface, a current that was not of water, but of memory. And in that stillness, Tsubaki came. She walked down from the dunes barefoot, the moonlight resting upon her like a veil. Her white kimono shimmered faintly with each step, and her hair, dark and free, caught the pale silver of the night. In her hands, she carried the old lantern, its paper now smooth, its glow steady and serene. Ren could not remember the last time he had seen it shine so brightly. She stopped beside him, her eyes on the sea. "The tide is high," she whispered. "It remembers." Ren turned to her, his voice quiet. "Remembers what?" Tsubaki's gaze did not move. The night the lantern first fell into the water. Her words drifted between them, and Ren felt the air change, heavier, deeper, filled with something ancient and kind. He had heard many tales from the elders, but this night felt like one itself, a story being written in real time, its ink the moonlight upon the tide. Tsubaki stepped forward, the waves curling gently around her ankles. She held the lantern above the surface. Its light spread across the water in widening circles, each ring glowing and fading like a heartbeat. Ren wanted to speak, but his voice would not come. Then the sea began to shimmer. Shapes appeared faint and fluid beneath the surface, hands, faces, fragments of memory. A fisherman's boat, drifting with no wind, a girl standing on the shore, holding a light, a promise whispered into the tide. Tsubaki's expression softened. "It's all still here," she said. "Every prayer, every farewell. The sea keeps them all." She looked at him, her voice trembling like a ripple in still water. "I was one of them once." Ren's breath caught. "One of?" She nodded slowly. "I waited. Every night, I waited by the water for someone who never came back. When my voice grew tired, I sang to the sea and it answered. It took me into its memory, so I could wait without pain, without time. Her eyes lifted toward the moon. But now, you've taught me something I had forgotten, how it feels to be heard. The waves rose slightly, glowing brighter. Ren stepped forward, the tide brushing his knees. "Tsubaki," he said, his voice breaking softly, "you're not just a memory. You're here. With me." She smiled, not sorrowful, but full of peace. "Because you called me back. You found the lantern, and with it, the voice that had been silent for centuries." She lifted the lantern higher, its light bathing them both. The sea around them pulsed with gentle radiance, not cold, not blinding, but warm, like the first touch of dawn. For a long while, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind stilled, and the only sound was the heartbeat of waves against the sand. Then Tsubaki lowered her gaze. "When the tide turns," she whispered, "I'll have to return. The sea does not hold its memories forever, it releases them, just as it once released me." Ren shook his head slowly. "I don't want to lose you." She reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was cool, but steady. "You won't," she said. "The sea gives back what the heart remembers." The first light of dawn began to appear on the horizon, pale, hesitant, touching the clouds with silver. The moon, still high, began to fade. Tsubaki turned toward the waves. Her reflection merged with the light upon the water, and for a heartbeat, Ren could not tell where she ended and the sea began. She looked back once, her eyes filled with something eternal, not sadness, but quiet gratitude. "Ren," she said softly, "when you hear the tide at night, listen closely. That sound, it's not the sea. It's me." And with that, she stepped forward, the water rising around her like silk. The lantern's glow spread outward, then slowly sank beneath the surface. Ren stood there long after she was gone. The sea was calm again, the sand unmarked, the sky washed in soft blue. When he turned to leave, he saw something resting where she had stood, a single camellia blossom, white and glistening with seawater. He picked it up, holding it to his heart as the morning tide whispered against the shore. And though the world had grown silent, he could still hear her voice. A melody woven into the breath of the sea, a lullaby for those who loved and waited, for those who dreamed and remembered. Chapter 7: When the Tide Sleeps. The days after Tsubaki's departure were slow and tender, like the fading of a song that lingers even after its last note. Ren rose each morning before the sun, walked to the shore, and stood watching the sea in silence. The waves were gentle again. They no longer glowed with strange light, but their rhythm held something new, a softness, a kind of compassion, as though the sea itself remembered him. Sometimes, when the wind changed, he thought he could hear her voice. Faint, far, but unmistakable, like a whisper carried inside the breath of the tide. Life in Hamora moved on. The fishermen prepared for the spring season. Children ran along the shore collecting shells. Old Ume called out to Ren as she always had, but her eyes softened when she looked at him. "Still listening to the sea, are you?" she teased one morning. Ren smiled faintly. "It speaks kindly now." Ume chuckled, shaking her head. "Then you've done something no one else has. You've made peace with the ocean." At night, Ren would light a small lamp, not the old lantern. For it was gone, but one he had made himself, its frame shaped in the same gentle curve, its paper thin and warm against the light. He would place it by the window, facing the tide. And as he drifted towards sleep, he would hear it, that soft lullaby, the one that Tsubaki had hummed. Each note came like a wave touching the shore, each pause like a breath between dreams. It no longer hurts to listen. It only reminded him that some things, love, memory, peace, do not end. They simply change shape, like water finding its way back to the sea. One evening, as spring rain whispered across the roofs, Ren dreamed again. He was standing on the shore, the moon reflected in calm water. The sea was still, as though sleeping. Then he saw her, Tsubaki, walking across the surface of the tide as if it were solid glass. Her steps left faint ripples of light that shimmered and dissolved. She carried no lantern this time. Instead, the light came from her, soft and steady, like the heart of dawn. "Ren," she said, her voice gentle as wind through reeds. He smiled in the dream, though his chest ached. "I thought you had gone back." "I did," she said. "But the sea is wide. It sleeps, and in its dreams, I can walk again." She came closer, her hand reaching out. He took it, and it was warm. "You waited," she whispered. Ren nodded. "You sang." Tsubaki's smile deepened. Then neither of us was alone. The sea began to glow softly around them, and for a moment it was not water at all, but something weightless, the space between waking and sleep. "I came to tell you," she said, "that the tide will always carry your voice too. When you speak, when you breathe, when you stand here and listen, the sea listens back." Ren felt tears, light and soundless, fall into the dream's surface. "Then I'll keep listening," he whispered. Tsubaki leaned close, her forehead resting lightly against his. "Good," she said, her words a sigh of peace. That's all the sea ever wanted, to be heard, and to be loved. When Ren woke, the rain had stopped. The world outside was washed clean, the air cool and full of quiet light. He rose, opened the shoji, and looked toward the horizon. The sea was calm, its color between silver and blue. The breeze carried the faint scent of lilies. On the windowsill, the lantern he had made flickered once then steadied, glowing gently, as if someone had touched it from afar. That evening, he walked down to the shore. The sand was cool beneath his feet, and the sunset painted the waves in amber and rose. He sat where she once had, hands resting on his knees, watching the slow rhythm of the tide. A small shell rolled to his foot. He picked it up and held it to his ear. Inside, he heard it a soft murmur, a lullaby, the song of forgotten shores. He smiled. The sea was no longer a place of longing. It was home. When night came, the moon rose over Hamura again, round, silver, kind. Ren lay down beside the window, the sound of waves cradling him like breath. He thought of her voice, of her hands, of the lantern that once glowed between them. The tide outside whispered, its rhythm slow and steady, a heartbeat older than the world, but still in tune with his own. And as he closed his eyes, he felt it, the sea falling asleep. Final chapter. Seaside village, embraced by the tide. Spring drifted gently into summer. The wind grew warm, and the waves carried the scent of salt and new life. The village of Hamura stirred with quiet joy, fishermen singing as they mended their nets, children laughing among the reeds, the temple bell echoing across the distant hills. And Ren, now older in spirit, though not yet in years, walked the same path each morning to the shore. He carried no nets, no tools, only a small lantern, its light calm and familiar. He would place it upon the sand, just where the tide reached but never took, and sit beside it in silence. Sometimes he would speak softly, telling the sea about his days, how the fish had returned, how the pine trees had grown, how the nights had become gentler. And sometimes he said nothing at all. For the sea had learned his language, and silence was enough. The villagers had come to see this ritual as something sacred. They called the place the listening shore. Some said that, on still nights, they could hear two voices singing there, one human, one not, woven together like the tide and the moon. Children would leave flowers by the water, white camellias, and the waves would carry them away tenderly, as though guided by unseen hands. One afternoon, as Ren sat beneath the shade of a pine, he noticed something glimmering at the water's edge. He walked closer. There, half buried in wet sand, lay a small seashell unlike any he had seen before, pale as moonlight, smooth as glass. When he lifted it, the shell hummed faintly in his palm. A soft vibration, almost like breath. He smiled. It was her voice again, distant but alive, folded gently into the heart of the sea. He held the shell to his ear. The sea never forgets, nor does the heart that listens. The whisper was barely there, yet it filled the world around him. That night, Ren lit the lantern once more. He placed it upon the windowsill, the same place where Tsubaki once sat. The moon hung low, and the tide shone like a road of silver stretching into forever. He leaned back, his eyes half closed, the sound of waves lulling him into a peaceful drift. Through the open shoji, a cool breeze carried the scent of lilies. It brushed his hair, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he felt her hand again, light as mist, warm as memory. The village quieted with the night. Crickets began to sing, and the stars turned slowly above the sea. Ren whispered, not to anyone near, but to the water itself. "Thank you," he said. The sea answered with a single, soft wave, curling around the shore as if to embrace his words. In his dreams, he saw the village from far above its roofs. Shining faintly under moonlight, its narrow paths glowing with lanterns, its people sleeping in peace. And beyond it, the endless tide breathed in rhythm, holding every sound, every dream, every life within its vast and gentle heart. He saw Tsubaki walking once more along the water's edge, her form light and luminous, her hair flowing like the tide. She paused, turned toward him, and smiled. No words were needed. Her gaze carried everything: farewell, remembrance, and something beyond both. Then she stepped into the horizon, where sea and sky became one endless calm. Ren awoke before dawn. The world was quiet, wrapped in silver mist. He rose, walked to the shore one last time, and placed the seashell beside the lantern. The first light of morning touched the water, and the waves seemed to bow toward the land, as if in gratitude. Ren closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The sound of the sea was soft, and within it he could still hear her, not as a song, not as a memory, but as part of the rhythm of all things. The tide came in, reaching the lantern, touching the shell, then drawing back a slow, eternal motion, the heart of the world itself. And in that breath between sea and shore, the village slept on, peaceful and whole, forever embraced by the tide. Wind chimes, barley tea, and summer afternoon. Prologue: the sound of quiet things. The sound of summer in Edo was not made by people. It lived in the hum of cicadas above tiled roofs, in the slow creak of a bamboo door, and in the clear, trembling note of a wind chime swaying beneath the eaves. The house stood at the edge of the city, where the road met the river and the air smelled faintly of pine and distant rain. Its walls were thin, its garden small, but it was a house that knew peace. Inside, time moved differently, not in steps or hours, but in breaths, in the quiet stretch between one sound and the next. In that house lived a boy named Haruto. He was 15 that summer, with sun-browned skin and a quiet heart that loved small, forgotten things: the ripples of water in a wash basin, the shadow of a bird passing through paper screens, the soft chill of a clay cup against his palm. It was the first summer he would remember for the rest of his life. That morning, the sky was a pale blue silk. The streets of Edo were still damp from last night's rain. Somewhere, a peddler's bell chimed faintly, and a vendor called out the price of fresh peaches. Haruto sat by the veranda, a half-finished cup of barley tea beside him. He had brewed it himself, carefully letting the roasted grains steep in cool water until the taste became earthy and round. A wind stirred the garden, brushing against the hanging chime, a small glass one with faint blue swirls. Its voice was delicate, clear, like the sigh of water on stone. The sound filled the air, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to pause. The wind chime had belonged to his mother. She had passed away 2 summers ago, and though Haruto's father rarely spoke of her, he still hung the chime every June, saying only that its sound kept the heat from becoming lonely. Haruto never asked what that meant. He only knew that when the chime sang, the house felt lighter, as though the summer itself leaned in to listen. Beyond the fence, the sound of Geta on the dusty road drew closer. Haruto looked up and saw a young woman approaching. Her parasol was white, her kimono light blue, and, though he did not know her, there was something familiar about the way she moved, a rhythm that matched the summer air. When she reached the gate, she paused, smiling. "Good morning," she said softly. "You have the most beautiful wind chime." Her voice was calm, carrying the faint lilt of a temple bell. Haruto rose, bowing politely. "Thank you," he said. "It belonged to my mother." The woman's smile deepened, but her eyes, calm and unreadable, seemed to look far beyond the garden. The chime sounded again, a single note trembling through the sunlight. Somewhere inside that sound, something shifted: the air, the light, perhaps even time itself. And in that stillness, the story began: a summer of soft winds, cool tea, and a voice that would echo long after the season faded. Chapter 1: The Boy by the Garden Gate. The woman stood just beyond the bamboo gate, her parasol glimmering faintly in the sunlight. The road behind her shimmered with heat, and the sound of cicadas filled the still air, a woven song that rose and fell like slow breathing. Haruto hesitated, unsure whether to speak first. She was not dressed like a villager or a merchant's wife. Her kimono was pale blue, almost silver, and around her neck hung a single string of tiny glass beads, catching the light like drops of morning dew. When the wind stirred again, the wind chime above them sang a single, perfect note that seemed to rest upon the air. The woman smiled. "That sound," she said, "it reminds me of when the summers were longer." Haruto blinked. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the words seemed to dissolve before they reached his lips. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing politely toward the garden. "Would you like to come in, miss? The sun is strong today." She lowered her parasol and nodded. "Only for a little while," she said. Her voice carried a softness that made the world seem slower. Haruto poured barley tea into 2 clay cups. The liquid was cool and amber, with the scent of roasted grain rising faintly between them. He placed 1 cup before her. She lifted it, holding it with both hands, and for a long moment simply watched the way the light shone through it. Then she spoke quietly. "I haven't tasted this in years." Haruto smiled shyly. "It's simple, but it helps with the heat." She nodded. "Simple things always do." Outside, the cicadas hummed on. The breeze carried the faint smell of pine needles and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from a temple, its tone deep and full, like the echo of time itself. The woman turned slightly toward the sound. Her expression softened, and a strange quiet settled around them, as if even the insects had paused to listen. "May I ask your name?" Haruto said after a while. She looked at him, eyes calm as the river beyond the village. "My name?" she repeated softly. There was a long pause. Then she smiled, faintly. "You may call me Sayaka." "Sayaka," Haruto repeated, and the name felt like a breeze on his tongue, light, fleeting, but full of warmth. They spoke little after that. The heat of the day grew gentle, and the sunlight through the paper screens painted shifting patterns across the tatami. Sayaka's gaze lingered on the wind chime. "Your mother's, you said?" "Yes," Haruto answered. "She used to hang it every summer. She said its voice would tell her when the rain was coming." Sayaka smiled faintly. "Did it?" Haruto thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But I think she just liked listening to it." Sayaka nodded, her eyes distant. "It's a kind sound," she said. "Not all sounds are kind. Some stay in the air even after they've faded, and some only appear when the heart is quiet enough to hear them." Her words hung between them, soft as the wind itself. Later that afternoon, Sayaka stood to leave. The sun had lowered, turning the sky a pale gold that shimmered across the rooftops. "Thank you for the tea," she said, bowing slightly. Her voice was warm, but when Haruto looked at her again, something in her eyes had changed, as if she were seeing not the present moment, but something remembered, far away. He watched as she stepped back onto the road, her parasol opening once more. The wind picked up. The chime above the veranda rang 3 times, each note soft, fragile, luminous. Sayaka paused at the sound, turning slightly toward him. "Keep listening," she said. "The world speaks in small ways. And sometimes it remembers us, too." Then she walked away, her figure fading into the haze of the summer street. When she was gone, Haruto stood for a long while by the gate, the cup of tea still half full beside him. The air smelled of roasted barley and river wind. The chime swayed once more, its sound barely a whisper now. But in that quiet, he thought he heard another note join it, a faint echo like someone humming from far away. He closed his eyes and listened. The sound lingered, and the afternoon stretched on endless, golden, as if the summer itself refused to move forward. Chapter 2: A pitcher of barley tea. The day after Sayaka's visit, the sky turned white with heat. The cicadas sang louder than before, their voices like threads weaving through the air, not harsh, but endless, as if the summer itself were humming. Haruto woke early, long before the town began to stir. He swept the veranda, watered the garden, and replaced the water in the bamboo basin where dragonflies sometimes landed. The sound of the wind chime drifted above him, clear, soft, irregular, like a voice thinking out loud. He had not seen Sayaka again, but her words still lingered. "Keep listening. The world speaks in small ways." By midday, the heat pressed down like a slow tide. The house was filled with the scent of tatami and sun-warmed wood. Haruto poured cool barley tea into a glass pitcher, watching the tiny bubbles rise and fade along the surface. The roasted barley gave off its soft, nutty scent, earthy, comforting, the smell of ordinary peace. He placed the pitcher on a tray alongside 2 clay cups, out of habit rather than intention. The second cup waited there, empty, its surface catching a shimmer of light that slipped through the paper screens. When the wind passed through the garden, the chime above the eaves sang again. Its tone was light but steady, as if speaking directly to him. And then a shadow crossed the garden path. Haruto turned, half expecting it, and there she was. Sayaka stood beneath the plum tree, her parasol closed, her hair slightly lifted by the breeze. "Good afternoon," she said, as though she had simply stepped out of a dream she had promised to return to. Haruto bowed lightly, smiling. "I thought you might come." Sayaka's eyes curved with warmth. "Then you've begun to listen properly." She sat once more by the veranda, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Haruto poured her a cup of barley tea, and this time, she did not hesitate before taking it. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the cicadas, the slow clinking of the chime, and the faint murmur of water from somewhere beyond the garden wall. The air shimmered faintly, and time seemed to loosen its grip. After some silence, Sayaka spoke. "When I was a child," she said, "there was a summer just like this one. The days stretched endlessly. The sky was so bright that even the shadows had color." Haruto listened quietly. She smiled, eyes unfocused, as though watching something unfold in another world. "My mother used to make barley tea in a clay pot," she continued. "She'd leave it by the window to cool. I'd sit nearby, and when the wind blew, the chime would ring, and I thought it was the sound of the tea dreaming." Haruto tilted his head. "Dreaming?" "Yes." Sayaka's voice softened. "When water cools, it remembers where it came from. When wind moves, it remembers the sky. And when summer grows quiet like this," she looked toward the chime. "The heart remembers, too." A dragonfly landed on the rim of her cup. Its wings shimmered like glass. Sayaka smiled, unmoving, and Haruto realized she had the kind of stillness that made even small creatures feel safe. He wanted to ask her where she lived, what family she belonged to, but somehow it felt wrong to ask, as if to question her would make her fade. Instead, he said quietly, "You speak as though you've been listening to the world for a long time." Sayaka looked at him, then really looked, and the faintest trace of sadness passed through her eyes. "Perhaps I have," she said. "Or perhaps I'm still trying to remember how." The sun shifted, casting long patterns through the shoji. The world was soft, unmoving except for the slow turn of air. Haruto poured more tea, and Sayaka accepted it with both hands. "This house," she said, "it's peaceful." "Do you live here alone?" "My father's in town," Haruto replied. "He works for the fish merchant. He'll be home when the sky turns red." Sayaka nodded. "And your mother?" Haruto hesitated. "She passed away 2 years ago." Sayaka's gaze lowered. "I see." Her fingers brushed the rim of her cup, tracing a faint circle as though following an invisible pattern. "She must have loved this sound," she murmured. "The wind chime. It sounds like someone breathing slowly, peacefully." Haruto smiled faintly. She said it made the house feel alive. Sayaka's eyes glimmered. Then perhaps it still does. The wind rose again. The chime sang, its voice delicate and strong all at once. Haruto closed his eyes, listening to it the way Sayaka had taught him, not just hearing, but feeling the air move through the sound. For a moment, he thought he heard something beneath it, a faint harmony, as if another chime were ringing somewhere far away, answering the one above his veranda. When he opened his eyes, Sayaka was watching him. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "What is it?" Sayaka smiled, but her voice was distant, almost like a memory speaking through her. "It's what's left behind when moments pass. The sound of time remembering itself." The shadows deepened. The day slipped slowly toward evening. Sayaka stood, brushing her sleeves lightly. "I should go before the cicadas are quiet," she said. "They fall silent only once each day, and that's when the night begins to breathe." Haruto rose with her. "Will you come again?" Sayaka looked toward the river, where the last light of the sun touched the water. "Perhaps," she said, "when the tea has cooled, and the chime has something new to say." She turned then, stepping down the path that led beyond the gate. The air shimmered once more, and as she passed through the light, her form seemed to blur, as though the heat itself were holding her shape. Haruto stood there long after she vanished, the sound of the chime still trembling in the air. That night, he dreamed of the garden at dusk, the wind chime glowing faintly, and a woman's voice singing softly from somewhere beyond the fence. He couldn't make out the words, but the melody was clear, a slow, endless lullaby, the sound of summer remembering itself. Chapter 3: The Woman Who Watched the Wind. The next morning, the world woke gently. A thin mist hung over the river, and the garden glowed with dew like a field of tiny mirrors. Haruto swept the stones again, the broom's sound slow and rhythmic swish, pause, swish, the heartbeat of a house that had learned to breathe with the summer. Above him, the wind chime swayed softly, each note delicate as falling glass. He could almost feel Sayaka's presence in the air, not as a person, but as something lighter, a trace of warmth that stirred when the wind moved through the veranda. That afternoon, clouds gathered beyond the mountains, the color of unpolished silver. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the cicadas sang louder, as though calling the weather closer. Haruto poured fresh tea, this time with extra barley for a deeper flavor. He placed 2 cups again, one for himself, one for the space beside him. He smiled to himself. It had become a habit now, a quiet invitation for the woman who watched the wind. When the first drop of rain fell, The chime rang with a single clear note, sharp, bright, then fading into silence. And then, as if that sound had called her, Sayaka appeared once more. She did not walk this time. She seemed to arrive, as though the air had shaped itself into her form. Her kimono was pale gray today, woven with threads that shimmered faintly when the light touched them. Her hair was pinned simply, a few loose strands moving like silk in the breeze. "You came before the rain," Haruto said quietly. Sayaka looked at the sky. "It's easier to see the wind when it carries water," she murmured. Her gaze followed the movement of the trees, the way the leaves turned before the droplets fell. Haruto tilted his head. "To see the wind?" Sayaka smiled. "Yes. Most people only feel it. But if you watch carefully, you can see its shape, how it bends the world, how it brushes against the air itself." The rain began in earnest, then soft at first, a whisper on the roof, then steady, wrapping the house in a gentle rhythm. Haruto leaned back against the pillar, listening. Sayaka's eyes were half closed, as if she were hearing something beyond the rain. "There," she said suddenly. "Do you hear it?" Haruto strained to listen. "I hear the chime and the rain." Sayaka nodded slowly. "Listen closer. Beneath the rain, there's a sound that doesn't belong to this world." He frowned slightly, then let his breath slow in, out, like the rhythm of the storm. And then he heard it, a faint, echoing tone, like a flute made of water, rising and falling just beyond the edge of perception. Sayaka smiled faintly. "That's the sound of the wind's heart," she said. "It's always there, but people forget how to hear it. When you do, you start to remember things that never quite happened." Haruto blinked. "Things that never happened?" "Yes." She turned toward him. "The wind carries everything: voices, laughter, sorrow, dreams. Sometimes it forgets to let them go. And sometimes it finds someone willing to listen." Her words sank into the sound of rain, weaving themselves into its rhythm. Haruto wanted to ask who she truly was, but he hesitated. Instead, he asked, "Do you belong to this village?" Sayaka's gaze lingered on the horizon. "I used to," she said softly. "Long ago, when the summers were longer." The phrase echoed the same words she had spoken the first day they met. But now, there was something heavier in them, a distant ache hidden beneath the calm. Haruto studied her face, the soft line of her mouth, the faint sadness that moved like a shadow behind her smile. He realized that she didn't seem to change with the light. The world shifted, clouds passed, rain fell, but she remained untouched, as if her presence belonged to something other than time. When the rain began to fade, Sayaka stood. "Do you know what the wind is, Haruto?" she asked. He shook his head. "It's the space between everything," she said. "Between the sound and the silence, between the living and the remembering. That's where I stay." Her voice was almost a whisper now, carried away with the last breeze of the storm. Before he could speak again, the chime rang once more, a clear, trembling note. When Haruto turned toward it, Sayaka was gone. Only the rain remained, falling softly on the garden stones. He stepped out into it, barefoot, feeling the cool water between his toes. The chime above him swayed gently, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw another shape beside it, a faint outline, like a woman's hand brushing the air. He blinked, and it was gone. But the chime continued to sing, and the sound seemed to say, "Not all things that vanish are lost. Some become the wind itself." That night, the rain stopped. The world smelled clean, and the crickets began their soft song again. Haruto sat by the veranda, a cup of barley tea beside him, watching the sky clear. The moon rose slowly, silver and calm. He listened to the wind chimes' faint ringing and thought of Sayaka, of the way she had looked at the air, as though it carried the memories of a world unseen. He closed his eyes and whispered to the night, "If the wind remembers, then please remember me, too." The chime answered, a single, delicate note that lingered long after the sound itself was gone. Chapter 4: Cicadas and the Path of Light. Night fell softly over Edo. The rain had passed, leaving the air clear and sweet, and the moon climbed slowly through a veil of drifting clouds. The garden shimmered faintly, its stones still wet, its leaves trembling with the memory of water. From the branches, cicadas continued their endless song, not loud, not frantic, but slow and hollow, like the heartbeat of summer itself. Each sound seemed to travel through the night and return as light, small, golden threads that floated above the veranda before dissolving into air. Haruto sat there, barefoot, his sleeves rolled, his hair damp with evening dew. The wind chime above him moved only slightly, its voice delicate and distant, as if coming from another world entirely. He had stopped wondering when Sayaka would appear. It no longer mattered whether she came as a person, a sound, or a whisper of the wind. He had begun to understand the world itself was listening. Every rustle of bamboo, every flicker of candlelight, every drop of dew on the stones, each carried something of her presence. And tonight, the air was full of it. When the moonlight deepened, the garden began to glow, not brightly, but softly, as if the night were exhaling light. The cicadas' song grew slower, their rhythm stretching, becoming something almost human, a chant, a sigh, a memory breathing itself awake. Haruto closed his eyes. The sound surrounded him, weightless, formless, and yet deeply familiar. Then came a faint sound, a step on the wooden floor. He turned, and there she was. Sayaka stood at the edge of the veranda, bathed in the silver light of the moon. Her kimono shimmered faintly, and for the first time, Haruto saw that it was not made of silk or cloth, but something lighter woven from the air itself. Her eyes held the same color as the river under starlight. "You're dreaming again," she said softly. Her voice was neither near nor far, but somewhere between them, the perfect distance where sound becomes silence. Haruto nodded slowly. "If I am," he said, "then I don't wish to wake." Sayaka smiled, and the wind chime above them answered a single note that rang pure and clear, spreading out into the night like a ripple of silver. "Do you see it?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the garden path. At first, Haruto saw nothing. Then the light changed, the stones of the path shimmered, each one glowing faintly, as if remembering every step ever taken upon them. "It's the path of light," Sayaka whispered. "It appears only when the air is still. Inato remember everything at once." He looked closer. The light was moving slowly, gently, flowing toward the river beyond the trees. Sayaka stepped onto it, barefoot. Her feet made no sound. She turned to him. "Walk with me." Haruto hesitated. The air around the path felt unreal, too calm, too alive. But Sayaka extended her hand, and without thinking, he took it. Her touch was cool, like the surface of a pond at dawn. Together they walked, each step sending faint ripples of light through the path. The world around them faded, the house, the trees, even the cicadas, until there was only the wind, and the sound of their breathing. As they walked, Haruto realized he could hear other sounds now, faint laughter, a lullaby, the clink of teacups, the sound of someone sweeping a veranda. Each sound passed like a wave, and he recognized them, the memories of the house, echoes of lives that had filled it once. Sayaka looked at him. "Do you understand?" He nodded slowly. "They're all here. Everything that ever was." "Yes," she whispered. "The world keeps nothing truly lost. It only hides it within the wind." The path widened, and the light grew warmer, changing from silver to gold. Sayaka stopped then, turning toward him. "This is as far as I can go," she said. Haruto frowned. "Why?" She smiled gently. "Because you still belong to the day." And her voice trembled like the chime's faintest tone. "I belong to what waits between the hours." The light flickered around them, and for a moment he thought he saw her face change younger. Softer, almost like his mother's when she had laughed beneath the same veranda. He felt something stir inside him, not sadness, but the quiet ache of remembering. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Sayaka looked up at the sky. "The wind always returns," she said. "And so do the hearts that listen." She stepped back, and the path behind her dissolved into air. Light gathered around her, turning her form to mist. Haruto reached out, but his hand met only the cool breath of night. He stood there alone, the last glow fading beneath his feet. The wind rose once more, and the chime above the veranda rang a soft, trembling note, followed by silence. The cicadas had stopped. The world held its breath. In that silence, Haruto felt something vast and gentle move through him, not sorrow, not longing, but peace. And as the moonlight touched his face, he finally understood the path of light had not vanished. It had simply folded back into the wind, waiting for someone to listen again. That night, he slept without dreams. The chime swayed quietly above him, and outside, the summer night shimmered like water, endless and calm. Chapter 5: The Evening That Smelled of Rain. By late summer, the air had grown soft again. The cicadas had quieted, their song replaced by the faint hum of evening crickets. The days shortened little by little, but the sunsets stretched, each one lingering longer, as if reluctant to leave. And on one of those long, amber evenings, Haruto sensed that something was changing. The wind no longer carried the same warmth. The chime above the veranda still sang, but its tone had deepened, as though the summer itself were slowly bowing out. He brewed barley tea again, pouring it into 2 cups out of habit. The smell rose earthy, comforting, faintly sweet, and he smiled, remembering how Sayaka used to lift her cup, holding it up to the light before she drank. The cup beside him remained untouched, but that didn't matter. He had learned that presence didn't need a body. Sometimes, the air was enough. That evening, the clouds gathered quietly. The sky took on a faint silver hue, and the wind that came before rain carried a strange, nostalgic scent, the scent of wet earth, of forgotten laughter, of something returning. He looked up. The wind chime swayed once, and the sound it made was unlike any before, a low, shimmering note, neither sad nor joyful, just endlessly gentle. He whispered, "Are you here again, Sayaka?" And the wind answered a cool breath across his cheek, a soft stirring of the paper screens. He closed his eyes. The world slowed. The rustle of bamboo. The first distant roll of thunder. The faint smell of rain, weaving itself through the air like a thread of memory. When he opened his eyes, she was standing by the garden gate. Her kimono was the color of twilight, neither blue nor gray, but something between them, as if made from the fading light itself. She smiled. "You still make tea for two," she said softly. Haruto nodded. "I didn't want the summer to end alone." Sayaka looked around the garden, where the stones glistened faintly from an earlier drizzle. "Nothing ever truly ends," she whispered. "It only changes its shape." They sat together again, the same way they had the first day they met, 2 cups, 1 silence. The wind moved through the veranda, lifting the scent of tea between them. Sayaka's gaze wandered toward the chime. "I used to listen to that sound when I was alive," she said suddenly, her voice calm, as if remembering a long-forgotten dream. Haruto froze, the words echoing quietly between them. She smiled faintly at his expression. "It's all right," she said. "Everything that breathes, someday becomes part of the wind." Outside, a soft drizzle began to fall. Each drop hit the garden stones with a tiny sigh, and the air grew thick with the smell of rain. Sayaka lifted her hand, catching a droplet in her palm. "It's time," she said. Haruto's throat tightened. "For what?" "To let go of the sound." He frowned slightly. "I don't understand." She looked at him with eyes as calm as moonlight. "The chime has done its work. It called me when I was forgotten, and now it calls you to remember, but also to rest." The rain grew heavier, but it was warm, gentle, almost like sleep. Sayaka stood, her form shimmering faintly in the curtain of water. Haruto rose too, his heart heavy yet peaceful. He wanted to speak, to tell her she didn't have to go, but when he looked at her again, he realized she was already becoming part of the rain. Her outline wavered, and the light that filled her seemed to flow outward into the air, into the sound of falling water, into the world itself. She turned to him one last time and smiled. "When the wind sings," she said, "listen closely. You'll find me there not as a voice, but as the silence that follows." The rain washed over the garden. Her shape faded completely. And then, the chime above them rang once, a single, perfect tone. It lingered. And then it, too, faded into the rhythm of the rain. Haruto stood for a long while in that quiet evening, the scent of rain and barley and memory around him. When the downpour eased, he took the chime down from the eaves. He held it in both hands, feeling the cool smoothness of the glass. The wind had stopped. The world was utterly still. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you." Then he placed the chime by the window, where the next breeze would find it again. That night, the rain continued softly until dawn. And when the first light came, the chime rang once more, its tone lighter, clearer, as if touched by someone unseen. Haruto sat up, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint smile. Somewhere in that sound, he could hear her not as a presence, but as peace itself. Outside, the world shimmered with dew. A new morning, a new silence. And through the open window, the soft voice of the wind whispered a sound that would never end. Chapter 6: The Wind That Remains. Morning came like a whisper. No footsteps, no voices, only the faint hum of the world waking slowly. The sky above Edo was pale, the color of barley tea before it cools. Mist drifted along the river, soft and slow, as if the night were reluctant to leave. Haruto opened his eyes to the quiet. The air smelled of wet earth and sunlight, and the first breeze brushed against the shoji screens like a hand made of light. The wind chime above the window moved once, its glass catching the dawn. It rang a clear, single note, bright enough to open the heart. And in that sound, he felt her again. He rose, barefoot, and stepped onto the veranda. The garden gleamed, the moss shining with dew, the stones cool underfoot. He could hear the faint rustle of the bamboo, the drip of water from the eaves, the far-off call of a morning heron. Each sound felt new, and yet ancient, as though the world had been quietly reborn while he slept. He poured himself a cup of barley tea. The steam rose in soft spirals, blending with the morning air. He lifted the cube and let the warmth rest in his palms. The chime sang again. Not loudly, not insistently, just a single, delicate voice sliding through the air like a memory. It was different now. Its sound was not hers, and yet it carried her still in the space between the tones, in the silence that followed. Haruto smiled. He did not need to call her name anymore. Because she had become the wind, and the wind had become the world. He stepped into the garden. The morning sun caught on every drop of dew, turning them into tiny mirrors of light. As he walked, the wind followed, gentle, warm, moving the leaves just enough to make them shimmer. He stopped beneath the pine tree and listened. There was no sound at all now, and yet everything was speaking. The silence was full, full of her voice, full of summer, full of peace. He knelt by the river bank, where the water moved in slow ripples. There, half buried in the silt, he found something small and smooth, a fragment of glass, shaped like a bell's edge. He held it in his palm. It caught the light and trembled faintly, as if it still remembered how to sing. He smiled and placed it gently back into the stream. The current carried it away, and for a moment, the whole river seemed to ring. As the sound faded, he felt the wind rise soft, cool, endless. It touched his hair, his hands, his heart. And in that moment, he understood what Sayaka had meant, that nothing truly ends, that all things become part of the wind, and that the wind, in its quiet way, remembers everything. The sun rose higher. The world brightened. A child's laughter drifted faintly from the distant road. A dog barked once, then fell silent. The smell of rice cooking reached him from a neighbor's home. All simple sounds, all small, and yet, each carried the same gentleness as the wind that now brushed across his face. He closed his eyes, listened, breathed. The breeze moved through him, soft as a sigh. Somewhere in that stillness, he heard the chime one last time, a sound so faint it might have been only the heart remembering. It faded, and the silence that followed was not emptiness, but rest. The garden shimmered. The light swayed. The wind remained. That night, as the stars returned to the same quiet sky, the wind chime above the window stirred once more. And if someone had been awake to listen, they might have heard a voice in its ringing, not words, but warmth. A reminder, a farewell, a promise, that everything which drifts away, returns in another season, in another breeze, in another dream. And somewhere between the sound and the silence, between waking and sleep, the world exhaled gently. And rested. Crickets singing in the night garden. Prologue: the Garden of Whispers. Night settled gently over the village. The lanterns had gone out one by one, and only the sound of the wind remained soft, slow, carrying the scent of damp earth. Beyond the narrow lane, there was a small garden hidden behind a wall of moss. The gate stood slightly open, and from within came a sound not human, not wind, but the soft, rhythmic singing of crickets. Each note was delicate, a thread woven into the darkness. The sound rose and fell, like the breath of someone sleeping. Sota knelt by the stone path, a rake resting lightly in his hands. He worked without a lantern, trusting the moonlight to guide him. The air was cool, and the fragrance of wet pine mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming lilies. He paused once, listening. The crickets were everywhere beneath the rocks, under the leaves, in the shadows of the small pond. Yet somehow, their sound did not fill the air. It became the air. He remembered what his master used to say. A garden is not made of soil and stone, Sota. It is made of sound and the silence between it. At the time, he had not understood. But tonight, as he knelt in the silver light, he began to feel it, that quiet presence that lingered between the chirping notes, like a thought that had forgotten how to leave. A breeze drifted through the trees, and the cricket's song shifted, as if answering something unseen. He looked up. Beyond the pond, among the tall reeds, a faint light moved small, pale, like the reflection of the moon on water. But there was no water there. The light flickered once, and he thought he saw a figure, a woman, standing still, her sleeves trailing like mist. He blinked, and she was gone. Only the sound of crickets remained, soft and steady, as if nothing had ever disturbed the night. Sota let out a quiet breath. He placed the rake down and bowed his head toward the pond. "Good evening," he whispered, though no one was there. And from somewhere deep in the garden, a single cricket answered a long, drawn-out note, like the echo of a name forgotten by time. He smiled faintly. The night deepened, and the sound of the crickets wrapped around him, slowly, tenderly, until his thoughts began to drift like falling leaves. Above him, the moon floated between clouds and the world exhaled. Everything was quiet again. Chapter 1: The Sound Beneath the Moon. The night after the first autumn breeze arrived, the moon rose wide and golden above the cedar trees. Its light spilled quietly into the garden, washing over the stones, the reeds, and the little pond where the water rippled without sound. Sota had finished his work before dusk, but he stayed. There was something about the air, something that made the night feel almost awake. He sat on the veranda, his knees drawn up, watching the slow shimmer of the moonlight on the pond. Somewhere, a cricket began to sing. Then another. Then a dozen more. The sound spread like ripples through the garden, a slow rhythm that filled the spaces between the leaves. He closed his eyes. It was not just sound anymore. It was movement. It was memory. It was something speaking, quietly, from the space between the living and the sleeping. His master's voice came back to him, soft, as it had always been. "Listen to the garden long enough, Sota, and it will speak. Not with words, but with time." He had laughed then, a boy too young to understand. But now, alone beneath the moon, he began to hear what the old man had meant. The sound was not only from the crickets. It was from the air itself, a harmony so faint it could vanish at a breath. He kept still, and in the next moment, he heard another sound. It was softer than the rest, barely more than a sigh, a single note, higher than the crickets, like silk brushing against stone. Sota turned his head. The pond reflected the moon, and beyond it stood the faint outline of a figure. A woman. Her hair fell long, black as the shadow of the reeds. Her kimono was white, but the moonlight gave it a faint blue hue, like frost before dawn. She did not move. She simply stood there, watching the pond, as though listening to something only she could hear. Sota rose quietly, his heartbeat slow, his steps careful on the veranda. He did not call out. Something in her stillness told him that words would not reach her. He stepped closer to the edge of the pond, and the sound of the crickets grew louder, as if they too were aware of her presence. The woman turned her head slightly, and their eyes met. In that instant, the world seemed to stop. Even the crickets fell silent. She spoke first, her voice barely more than the wind itself. "Do you always stay awake this late?" Sota blinked. Her tone was gentle, but there was something ancient in it, a depth that did not belong to the living world. "I listen," he said simply. "To the crickets." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you must know their secret." He frowned slightly. "Their secret?" She nodded. "Every night they sing the same song. But it is never the same meaning." She stepped closer, and the faint light followed her, as though the moon itself wished to see her face. Her eyes were calm, not black, but the color of deep water. "Who are you?" Sota asked, the question leaving him before he could stop it. The woman tilted her head. "Who I was, or who I am?" He hesitated. "Both." She looked down at the pond, her reflection rippling in the water. "I was once someone who listened, as you do now. But I forgot what I heard." Her words drifted through the air like mist. The crickets began again, a slow, echoing pulse that filled the silence. The woman's sleeve brushed the reeds, and they swayed gently, as though moved by her breath. Sota could not tell if she was real, if her feet touched the earth at all. Yet, she felt present. More real than anything the day had ever shown him. "What do you hear now?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "The same song you hear. But I hear it from the other side." "The other side of what?" She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw sadness in her eyes. "The other side of remembering." The wind rose slightly. Leaves rustled in the trees, and the air cooled, carrying the faint scent of rain from far away. The woman turned toward the garden gate. "Tomorrow, the crickets will sing again," she said. "Listen closely. You may begin to remember, too." And with that, she stepped back, her form blurring in the moonlight, like mist touched by dawn. In an instant, she was gone. Sota stood alone beside the pond. The crickets sang on, steady and low, as if to fill the space she had left behind. He exhaled slowly. The night was deep, but it no longer felt empty. It felt awake. He looked at the water once more, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw her reflection, a faint shape, smiling beneath the moon. Then the ripples took it away. He whispered into the night, "Good night, whoever you are." And from somewhere unseen, a cricket answered a single, drawn-out note, soft as breath, long as memory. The garden settled again. The moon drifted higher, and Sota, still listening, felt the world grow calm around him as though sleep itself had come to sit beside him. Chapter 2: The Woman by the Pond. The next evening arrived as gently as a sigh. The day's warmth had faded, and the sky carried the faint scent of wood smoke and the sea. In the west, the last light of sunset lingered on the edge of the clouds, a thin thread of gold slowly unraveling into blue. Sota finished sweeping the moss path and set his broom beside the veranda. The garden was quiet. Only the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the faint murmur of crickets filled the dusk. He sat down, folding his legs beneath him, and let his thoughts drift with the rhythm of the night. He did not expect her to come again. And yet, he could feel it, that faint, invisible change in the air, like the pause before a note is played. The moon rose, round and clear, its reflection spreading across the pond like silk. A single cricket began to sing. Then another answered. Their tones overlapped softly, like two breaths crossing in sleep. And then, there she was. She stood once more at the far side of the pond, half hidden by the reeds. Her white kimono glowed faintly in the moonlight, and her long hair swayed like the shadow of smoke. This time, she looked directly at him. Sota bowed slightly. "I hoped you might come back." The woman smiled. "Then the garden must have remembered me." Her voice was soft, but it seemed to carry through every leaf and ripple. He hesitated, then asked, "Are you a ghost?" She laughed quietly, a sound lighter than water. "If I were, would that frighten you?" He shook his head. "Not tonight." The woman stepped closer, and the moonlight followed her. Each step she took disturbed neither shadow nor sound. It was as if the garden itself made space for her to move. When she reached the edge of the pond, she knelt gracefully, her reflection trembling beside his. "They call this place the Garden of Whispers, do they not?" she asked. Sota nodded. "It's what my master used to call it. He said every sound here remembers the hands that shaped it." She touched the surface of the water with one finger. Ripples spread outward, slow, perfect circles that shimmered and vanished. "Then your master was right," she said. "Sound never truly fades. It only changes its shape." Sota watched the ripples fade. "What sound are you made of?" Her eyes flickered toward him, dark and deep as the pond at midnight. "I am made of what was forgotten," she said, "and what waits to be remembered." Her words lingered in the air, soft but weighty, like the moment before the first snow touches the ground. He did not reply. Instead, he listened to the crickets, to the wind, to the slow heartbeat of the garden. The silence between their words felt alive. A faint breeze stirred the reeds. The crickets shifted their rhythm, as if the garden itself breathed with them. Sota looked at the woman again. "What do you hear when they sing?" She closed her eyes. "I hear what I once was. And what I will be again." Her voice trembled slightly. It was not sadness, but something older, a longing that had no name. He wanted to ask more, but the words would not come. Instead, he reached into the water beside him, cupping a small handful, and let it fall back into the pond. The sound it made was small, a silver whisper, and yet the woman's gaze followed it with care. "Every drop knows its way," she murmured. "Even after it falls." The crickets' song softened, their tones drifting toward stillness. Somewhere in the darkness, a night heron cried once, and then the garden was silent again. When she spoke next, her voice was barely audible. "Tomorrow, I will forget again. But if you listen, I will return." Sota met her eyes. "Then I'll listen." She smiled, and for a moment, the world seemed to glow with her presence, a fragile light born from quiet. Then, without a sound, the garden breathed once more. The wind stirred the trees, and the crickets began their song again, slow, low, like the earth's own heartbeat. Sota remained where he was, his eyes on the pond. He did not move. He did not sleep. He only listened until the first pale light of dawn touched the tips of the cedar leaves. And in that light, the garden seemed to whisper, "Remember." Chapter 3: The Garden That Dreams. The third night came with rain. Not heavy, but soft, a sound like silk brushing over the tiles, like the slow exhale of the world. Sota sat beneath the veranda roof, watching the drops gather on the eaves and fall one by one into the pond. Each ripple that spread across the surface seemed to echo something familiar, a rhythm he could almost remember. The garden was darker than usual. The moon hid behind drifting clouds, and the lantern by the gate had gone out. Yet he did not feel alone. The air was full not with sound, but with presence. The moss, the stones, the water, the trees, each seemed to breathe, slowly, together. It was as if the entire garden had fallen into a single, shared dream. He closed his eyes. The rain's whisper deepened. The sound of the crickets blurred into the rhythm of the drops. And then, from somewhere within that rhythm, a voice. Soft. Familiar. "You hear it, don't you?" He opened his eyes. She was sitting beside him. The woman in white miyako. Her hair was damp from the rain, and yet her sleeves were dry. She looked as though the rain itself avoided her touch. Sota bowed his head slightly. "I thought you might not come tonight." She smiled faintly. "The rain never keeps me away. It only hides me." Her eyes drifted to the garden. The earth remembers best when it rains. He followed her gaze. Drops struck the pond, sending circles that shimmered briefly before merging into stillness. "It feels alive," he said softly. "It is," she replied. "It always has been. You just forgot to feel it." He frowned slightly. "How can a garden live?" She turned to him, and her expression was both tender and sad. "Everything that holds sound lives. The soil remembers the footsteps that touched it. The stones remember the hands that placed them. Even the air remembers the names it once carried." She paused, listening to the rain. "And the crickets," she added, "remember what silence feels like." Her words settled into him like seeds. He found himself thinking of his master, the old gardener's hands, the way he used to hum while raking the gravel. He remembered the day the old man died, the silence that followed, how even the wind had stopped for a while. He had never thought the garden might still remember that moment, too. The rain began to fade. The clouds drifted apart, and the moon appeared again, a pale, round lantern above the cedar trees. Its light fell across the pond, turning the ripples into threads of silver. Miyako rose to her feet, her sleeves moving like wings. "Tonight," she said, "the garden dreams of what it once was." "What do you mean?" She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through time. "It dreams of the first sound it ever heard." The air changed. The scent of wet earth deepened, and the light grew softer, as if filtered through water. Then Sota heard it, faint at first, a hum beneath the cricket's song. It was not a voice, not exactly. It was something older, a vibration that lived within the soil itself. The pond rippled once, though no wind touched it. The trees swayed without sound. And for a heartbeat, Sota saw them, shapes moving within the light, like memories walking through water. He saw the garden as it had once been: new stones, fresh moss, his master's hands laying the first path. He saw himself as a child, following the old man, asking questions about every leaf. He saw nights filled with fireflies, mornings heavy with dew, and the moment his master smiled for the last time. All of it shimmered before him, not as memory, but as presence, the garden dreaming itself awake. When the vision faded, he found himself back beneath the veranda. The rain had stopped completely. The air was cool, and the crickets sang softly once more. Miyako was still there, watching him. "You saw it," she said. He nodded slowly. "I saw everything." She smiled. "Then you understand." He looked down at his hands. They were never gone, were they? The ones who built this place. She shook her head gently. "Nothing that is remembered is ever gone. Even dreams have roots." For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft chirping of the crickets and the faint dripping of water from the roof. Sota felt the night settle around him like a blanket. The world no longer seemed divided between past and present, between sound and silence. It was all one breathing moment. He turned to her. "Why do you come here?" Her gaze drifted to the pond. "Because I was part of this garden once." The wind stirred the reeds. Her hair moved with it, as if the air itself recognized her. "What part?" he asked softly. Her smile was faint. Perhaps the sound of the water. Perhaps the shadow of the lilies. It doesn't matter. All things return to the same silence in the end. She looked up at the moon. "When you sleep," she whispered, "the garden will remember you too." Sota felt something ease inside him, a quiet he had never known before. He nodded. "Then I'll stay. I'll listen until it does." Her expression softened. "That is enough." The crickets sang once more, slow and even, their rhythm blending with the wind. The world dimmed gently, like a lantern's flame lowering in the dark. And Sota, still seated by the pond, felt his thoughts drift like leaves on water until all that remained was sound, and breath, and peace. Chapter 4. When the crickets fell silent. The nights grew colder. The air had thinned, and the scent of pine needles drifted faintly through the dark. Autumn was leaving. The cicadas were gone, the frogs quiet, and only a few crickets still lingered near the edge of the pond. Their song was softer now, not the full chorus of summer, but a scattered murmur, like memories almost forgotten. Sota walked the garden at dusk, his hands folded behind his back. The moss glowed faintly under the pale moon, and the stones were cool beneath his bare feet. Each step echoed quietly in the stillness. He paused beside the pond, looking at the reflection of the sky. The water was clear, the moon whole and bright within it. But the air felt strange tonight, as though the garden itself were holding its breath. He waited, listened. No sound came. He had not noticed until that moment how constant the cricket's song had been, how it had filled every space between thought and dream. Now that it was gone, the silence felt vast. It was not emptiness. It was presence, something unseen but near. He closed his eyes, and in that quiet, he felt her again. Miyako. She did not appear at first. Only her voice drifted through the still air, soft and distant, like the sound of water remembered in sleep. "Do you hear it?" Sota whispered. "I hear nothing." Her voice replied, "That is the beginning." The mist thickened above the pond. Shapes moved within it, light and shadow blending, as if the air itself remembered form. Then she stepped forward. Miyako, dressed in white, her figure more translucent than ever. The moon shone through her sleeves. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were heavy with sorrow. "You knew this night would come," she said. He nodded slowly. "The silence warned me." She walked closer, her feet making no sound. The mist parted around her like breath. "The crickets are sleeping now," she said. "They have sung their last song for this season." Sota looked at the still water. "It feels too quiet." "Quiet," she murmured, as only the sound of waiting. He turned toward her. "Waiting for what?" She smiled faintly. "For remembering." Her voice trembled, and in it he heard the echo of rain, of wind through the bamboo, of all the nights that had passed uncounted. The garden seemed to pulse softly, as though her words had weight. "Miyako," he said quietly, "what are you?" She lifted her gaze to the moon. "I am the sound that remains when the song ends. The hush after a heartbeat. The breath before a dream." Her form shimmered slightly, as though the air could no longer hold her. Sota took a step forward. "Will you vanish when the silence stays?" Her smile deepened, sad and serene. "All things fade into silence, Sota. Even you. Even this garden. But fading is not loss, it is returning." He felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that follows tears not yet shed. The mist thickened again, surrounding them both. The moonlight turned silver white, and the pond's reflection blurred. "I don't want to forget," he whispered. She looked at him gently. "Then remember through silence. That is how the garden breathes." Her hand lifted, hovering inches from his. For a moment, he felt warmth a pulse, as if two echoes had touched. Then, nothing. The crickets were gone. The wind was still. Even the water seemed to hold itself in place. And yet, in that silence, he heard everything: the whisper of moss, the weight of moonlight, the memory of her voice. It was all there, woven into the quiet. Miyako began to fade. Her figure dissolved slowly, like smoke folding into the air. "Will you come again?" he asked. She shook her head once. "I am already here. As long as you listen." The last of her light merged with the moon's reflection, and then she was gone. Sota stood alone. No sound. No voice. Only stillness. But he was not afraid. He felt the world breathing not with sound, but with presence. He knelt beside the pond and touched the water. It was cool, smooth, alive. He closed his eyes and let the silence carry him. And somewhere in that deep, unbroken quiet, he heard it: a single, faint note, the memory of a cricket's song, rising. Not from the air, but from within himself. It lingered for a heartbeat, then faded again into peace. Chapter 5 The Night Within the Dream. The silence did not end. It changed. It deepened, like water growing darker with each breath. Sota was no longer certain if he was awake. The air felt soft, too soft, as though it were made of memory. The garden was there, yet not as he knew it. The stones shimmered faintly, and the pond stretched wider than before, its surface smooth as glass. Above it, the moon hung low, an enormous lantern adrift in still water. He walked slowly through the moss, barefoot, the coolness of the earth rising through him like a pulse. No sound reached his ears. Yet, in the quiet, he heard everything: the sound of sap moving in the trees, the whisper of petals folding for the night, the faint hum of his own heart. Each breath became a note, each heartbeat a ripple. It was no longer silent. It was the music beneath silence. The pond reflected the sky so clearly that he could not tell which world he stood in, above or below. When he looked down, he saw his reflection move a moment later than he did, as though time had slowed inside the water. And in that reflection, another figure appeared. Miyako. She stood beside him again, her image forming not beside him, but within the pond. Her voice came like a breeze through a dream. "You have entered the garden's sleep." Sota's voice was soft. "Is this death?" She smiled. "Not death. Only remembering." He gazed around. The garden glowed faintly, as if the moss itself held light. The stones breathed. The trees swayed without wind. The world was dreaming, and he was inside its dream. "Why am I here?" he asked. "Because you listened long enough," she said. "When you listen, the dream listens back." She raised a hand, and the pond rippled outward, not in water, but in light. Through that shimmer, Sota saw shapes, shadows of lives that once passed through the garden. A child chasing fireflies. An old man trimming pine branches. A woman laughing beside a lantern. Moments, flickering like candle flames. All of them disappeared again into the glow. Miyako stepped closer, her reflection overlapping with his. "You see?" she whispered. "This place holds them all. The living, the gone, the dreaming, the sound that once was, and the silence that follows." He nodded slowly. "I understand now. You never left. You became part of it." Her eyes softened. "As will you." The words did not frighten him. They felt natural, like the end of a song he had always known. He closed his eyes. The light of the moon spread across his face, warm and weightless. He felt his thoughts loosen, one by one, until even the thought of his own name began to fade. All that remained was soundless breath and a calm that had no edge. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing by the pond, but everything was different. The moon was gone. In its place, a faint, golden dawn glimmered on the horizon. The crickets were singing again, not loud, not near, but somewhere beyond hearing, like the echo of light itself. The garden breathed with him. Every leaf, every stone, seemed to move in rhythm with his chest. He understood then the garden was not outside him anymore. It lived within. Miyako's voice returned, soft, distant, as if spoken from the heart of the world. Sleep now, Sota. The garden remembers. You are part of its dream. Her voice faded like mist in sunlight. He lay down beside the pond, the moss cool against his skin. He watched the last stars vanish, one by one, like quiet notes dissolving into morning. The air was still. The light is gentle. The sound of the crickets drifted farther away until it was no longer sound, but feeling. And Sota, the gardener who listened, closed his eyes and slept. Epilogue: the night that never ends. The world had fallen silent. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion, like the pause after a final note, when the song has given all it can. The garden slept. The pond no longer rippled. The stones were cool and patient, holding the memory of countless seasons. The wind had gone beyond hearing. The moon had folded itself into dawn. And Sota lay upon the moss, breathing as gently as the earth itself. No one knew how long he slept. Time no longer moved in the garden. The morning light did not rise, the night did not return. It was neither one nor the other, a stillness between. Yet within that stillness, life continued. The moss grew tenderly over his hands. A fern unfurled beside his shoulder. The pond shimmered faintly each time he exhaled. It was as though the garden itself breathed through him. Far away, a bell sounded. Soft. Single. Its tone lingered, folding through the air like drifting incense. In that note, something stirred, not a thought, not a dream, but an awareness. Sota's eyes opened, slowly, as if he were waking not from sleep, but from the memory of being human. The world around him was luminous. Everything glowed from within: the stones, the water, the trees. It was all one endless breath of light. He sat up and realized he no longer cast a shadow. His hands were transparent, made of moonlight and air. When he moved, the crickets began to sing again, softly, reverently, as if greeting something long awaited. The song was not for him, and yet it was him. Each note rose and fell with the rhythm of his pulse, until even that distinction disappeared. A voice came from the water, familiar, gentle, woven through the sound of the crickets. "You stayed." He smiled faintly. "I listened." Then the garden remembers. He looked around. Where the veranda once stood, there was now only water and sky, seamless, reflecting one another endlessly. "Is this the end?" he asked. The voice answered, "Number. It is what begins when endings rest." The wind moved once, slow and tender. It carried with it the scent of the old pine tree, the faint sweetness of the lilies, and the warmth of a summer long gone. He could feel it all, the seasons that had passed, the people who had walked here, the dreams whispered under the moon. All of them breathed within him now. He was the gardener, the garden, the song, the silence. And as he listened, the cricket's music stretched onward, not in rhythm or melody, but in pulse, like the heartbeat of the night itself. It never grew louder. It never faded. It simply was. The sound without beginning or end. The dream that never wakes. The night that never ends. Beyond the horizon, the stars trembled, their light falling gently over the sleeping earth. The pond mirrored them perfectly, until it was impossible to tell whether the stars were in the sky or beneath the water. The air was soft. The world breathed once more. And somewhere, beneath the eternal song of the crickets, a whisper drifted through the silence. "Rest now," the wind answered. The garden listened. And the dream went on.